Good evening. This is Professor Aminah Al Deen on Critical Talk, which is a production of Sound Vision TV. We're embarking on something new and different in that we're going to do a series on getting ourselves ready to figure out what disinformation is, what how we should go about thinking about our vote, um, all questions about civics, and all of those things. And we're going to begin our journey this evening with Professor Scott Hibbard and with attorney Abdullah Mitchell. Are they both there?
Yes, we are.
Good
That's
afternoon.
hopeful. Okay. Attorney Abdullah Mitchell, who you've seen on Critical Talk before, is a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois. He's a chairperson for the Leadership Development Institute, and he is also the CEO of CIOGC, which is the Council of Islamic Organizations in Greater Chicago. Professor Scott Hibbard is an associate. I don't want to like that associate because he's really a professor, but I got to put it there. Um, and chair of the Department of Political Science at DePaul University in Chicago. He teaches courses on American foreign policy, Middle East politics, international relationships, and tonight he's going to do a little bit of teaching on civics and political communication. And he's the author of Religious Politics and Secular States, Egypt, India, and the United States, among other publications. Gentlemen, I think we're going to have a rip roaring evening as we begin. I had suggested to both of you that we take a look at political communication. We're often telling folk you got to distinguish between what's real news and what's fake news. And at the end of one of our programs, we even gave them news sources which are more accurate than others. I can't say that they're all the way true either because I don't know. Um, but how do we get in there? Some things you hear are absolutely false. You know in your gut they're false, but they sound so good. And they hit all of your bones where you need to be hit for that day. But let's start off with definitions. And because all of this, whether it's on social media, whether it's on CNN or BBC News or your local news station, is political communication. What is it?
Abdullah, you want to start?
Well, okay. Thank you. Good. Once again, welcome to your audience to this very important and timely topic. And when we look at this concept of political communications, I first want to focus in on who are all the stakeholders. I mean, clearly we have policymakers, elected officials. And then in this day and age, as so much messaging, we rely on the media, a host of internet websites, as well as the traditional media sources, national networks. And then the citizens, the voters themselves, all play a role. And the concern, I think, which gives rise to our conversation, is, as Dr. Al Deen, you referred to, there's so much misinformation and that people are being misled. So we really want to look at the players, the ones where the purveyors of information that we as citizens that are fed to us as citizens to ask us to used as information and data to exercise our right to vote. And it is challenging. The last thing I would like to say about that is unfortunately, repetition starts to breed, gives validity to what is said. And that's another problem or that we are confronted with as voters when we talk about political communications.
Yeah, I would echo that last point. There is an element of if you repeat a lie often enough, people would come to accept it as true. And I saw that as very pronounced in the 1990s. Anyway, my colleague Abdullah has outlined the issues quite well. The way I look at political communication is really kind of any communication between governments and political leaders or operatives and the populations or their constituencies. But there is multiple aspects to this, in part because back in the day, governments were very careful about what kind of information their populations were viewing. So in like the former Soviet Union, they controlled the media because that's how you control the way people think. In the United States, we had obviously multiple television broadcasting stations that were licensed by the government. So there wasn't quite so much control by governments, but there was still a much more of a consensus view, and there was high standards of journalism and journalistic excellence that kind of ensured that what was being promoted on over the airwaves was actually true and accurate. Newspapers, of course, kind of span the gamut.
Oh, wait a minute. Wasn't there some kind of regulation about how much lying you did?
The fairness doctrine. Well, so actually, what back in the day, up until the Reagan era, there was what was known as the fairness doctrine, where if as the government gave licenses to over-the-air broadcasters, in exchange they had to ensure that their content was truthful and accurate, and if they were going to take a political position on an issue, they had to give equal airtime to an opposing view, and that was in force up until the Reagan administration, which repealed the fairness doctrine, and that was about the same time. Yeah, that went by the wayside. In part because they were concerned about what they saw as the liberal bent of the mainstream media. I would argue it's not liberal; it's actually very corporate, but that's another matter. But the larger issue is that what we've seen since the 1980s and 90s is really this proliferation of outlets, whether it's cable television, satellite television. So now social media, you just have so many different views and so many different channels, and people become very segmented in their sources of information. And the way that it's typically phrased is we have a fragmented media market, and so we're not so as a society we are getting many different views, and we can live in these, not to use the academic jargon, but we can live in these epistemic bubbles, or these, we can inhabit these worlds where we get fundamentally different information than your neighbor, and that really kind of eats at the cohesiveness of society, particularly if it's not rooted in empirical reality, which we can talk more about later.
No, well, let me ask this because maybe it was earlier today. I open up my phone and I get Apple News, right? And I go one place and it tells me that much of the United States is going to be hit with a heat wave. 4 news articles down, it tells me that we're getting ready to have a cold spell. And I'm saying, do you all know each other? Why? Why is there such disparity between even something as simple as the weather, let alone who's running? But let's go back to you all's interesting conversation on political stuff. Miriam, can you put up just a little clip from January 6th? Let's look at a little of January 6th. Now, this is being called a peace circle. I don't know who did this, but it's a peace circle. People are jumping on top of each other. They're jumping on the railing. They're running to the Capitol. Patriots all.
Yeah. So this is one of those moments where, you think there's an objective reality or objective reading of what's unfolding. And I think initially there was, and Kevin McCarthy, who was then Speaker of the House, or I guess he was about to become Speaker of the House, he had it with the craziness of the mob outside. A few days later, he totally turns it around, and it's like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. What I find fascinating, and this is one of the reasons why I was really happy that the House really went forward with the January 6th hearings, because you did get kind of a deeply grounded, in fact, rendering of what happened that day. You had people testifying, you had archival or you had film evidence introduced, and you had copious amounts of material written chronicling what happened. This is the objective reality. Now, what's interesting is the way it's being spun in right-wing circles. There's a thing called the Epoch Times, which is a conservative media outlet, and they produced a video providing an alternative narrative about what happened that day. And
Can
again,
we find that, Miriam, while we're having a discussion? What is it called? The Epoch Times?
Epoch Times, yeah. It's selectively interpreting the data to offer an alternative narrative. And in doing so, I would argue that this actually is not grounded in fact. That what they're trying to do is spin their constituency and kind of create a false narrative of what's actually happening in the country, and a false narrative of what actually happened on that day.
I remember. Well, I don't actually remember. I think I saw it in a video. That when the people felt that the government was not serving them in the early days of the settler colony, that they revolted. Didn't they do that, or am I missing something?
Oh, they did.
Well, some will say that's what happened on January 6th.
Yeah,
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Isn't January 6th, or could it be a replay of the people saying, "No, I've had enough"?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think the difference though is what they were challenging was the counting of the votes, the Electoral College votes, and the peaceful transfer of power. And they were operating under the assumption that the election had actually been stolen. Now, the people that were saying the election was stolen, most of them knew it was a lie. And they were promoting this false narrative because they had a political agenda. Now, a lot of people that were out there, running over the barricades believed the big lie. But it doesn't mean that it was rooted in reality. And that's kind of my point, is that, what's really problematic in this moment in time is the creation of fictional narratives for political ends. And that's totally undermines the democratic process. I mean, it undermines, the basic notions of civility within American public discourse.
But the law functions so slowly. You think that woman handling those scales went on serious vacation, because by the time the law gets around to handling anything, those who would like to say that an election has been stolen, they've repeated it hundreds of thousands of times, right? So that becomes the thing to unseat.
Well, let me respond by saying, once again, the law, the courts, the law enforcement, that's the safety net for our society, to the guardrails, if you want to fashion it that way. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with each of us as citizens. What is our responsibility to maintain this institution called democracy? Is it is it something you only do on the first Tuesday of November, or is it an obligation to remain informed, to actually look at the facts as they are, the representations made to us as facts, and really push back? Unfortunately, too often as a populace, we remain silent and let's say disaffirming in our mind. And sometimes, well, not too often, silence is viewed as acquiescence. So we're contributing to the problem as citizens, that by not trying to vet the information that's come to us, and when we know it's wrong, push back against it.
But how could citizens have pushed back against, on the ground, what happened on January 6th?
It's like being in a canoe. You're talking about what can be done. The canoe is basically at the edge of the waterfall. Actions needed to be taken along much before that time to challenge the narratives. I mean, this whole notion of the elections were stolen, when we have, as Scott has referred to, false information, but it was never really seriously challenged. It was really given a platform. And what was motivated, and this is one of the dangers that I see of political communications, because media organizations are motivated by profit. They need the clicks, them social media clicks, so that their news agency stays on top. Truth sometimes is not it's not as appealing as a juicy lie.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump got so much media airtime, because he's just bombastic. He says outrageous things, and from a news organization's perspective, this is great. Because people are going to watch this. It's going to hold the viewers. Whereas Joe Biden, he's getting legislation passed. He's doing things, but it's just so boring. And the news agency or news programming really likes the spectacular.
I'm going to take a 2-minute break here, and I want to come back and talk about this recent CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, and what they are doing, which is a repeat. It's again that, keep repeating it. Except they added some lies I hadn't quite heard yet. But let us take a break. This is Professor Aminah Al Deen. I'm talking with Professor Scott Hibbard and attorney Abdullah Mitchell about political stuff. We got to pay political attention. We'll be right back. Good evening. This is Professor Aminah Al Deen with Critical Talk, and we're having a wonderful show about paying political attention. This is one of a series, and I'm with Professor Scott Hibbard, who is a professor and chair of the Political Science Department at DePaul University, and attorney Abdullah Mitchell, who's the CEO of CIOGC, which is the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. Boy, that's a mouthful. Anyway, I want to go, and I'm going to ask Miriam to play quickly one of 2 clips we have on this conference.
Look, folks, we understand. There is a swamp right across that river, right up there. They are the ones that are seeking to destroy not our democracy, but our constitutional republic. And is it incumbent upon us to restore it? We've watched as our schools have turned into incubators of hatred, hatreds of Christians, hatred of straight people, of white people, of successful people, hatred for our forefathers, hatred of our history, hatred for those who founded from nothing the greatest country in the history of the world, the United States of America.
Okay. If we were to analyze this, please, gentlemen, who is the they? Biden?
The secular humanists, I should say the liberal secular humanists. when you look at the narrative that, I mean, there's always been a divide within the society over, you know, kind of competing visions of how national identity ought to be formed, and you know, kind of what the proper role of religion in public life is. And in some respects, this is kind of another iteration of that. They argue for a very close affiliation of state and church, or to say religion and government, conservative event, not just any religion, by the way, religion, you know, conservative evangelical Christianity and government. And from their perspective, the enemy is, you know, are those liberals within their own midst who disagree with them politically, but also minority populations and particularly immigrant populations. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of an external other and an internal other, or external enemy, internal enemy. And that's who the they is. Now, last comment on this, a lot of what they're criticizing too is the Supreme Court rulings that have happened over the years that have, you know, we do have a constitution that enshrines a separation of church and state within the Constitution. And the Supreme Court has made a number of rulings that has, you know, banned, you know, state-led prayer in school, that has allowed women's right to choose up until recently, that has made other rulings about discrimination unconstitutional. And from his perspective, these are all efforts to undermine a faith-based understanding of American society.
Well, wait a minute. If the Constitution says, I mean, I guess they're saying, who looks at it anyway? But if the Constitution says that the country, and I don't agree with him, of course, that it was founded on nothing. That sounds like another argument I've heard recently from across the pond. But that it was founded, and there is this thing called the Constitution, which says there should be a separation of church and state. What does that mean first? Well, before I mess it up.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn to my colleague, the lawyer, for a minute. But just so we're all on the same page, you know, the Constitution says Congress shall it prohibits the establishment of religion by Congress, or Congress shall pass no law establishing a religion, but it will not pass no law, you know, infringing upon the free exercise thereof. And
but that says that it's the government, and I'm assuming the federal government, that can't pass a law about the establishment of. Doesn't say the states can't. I'm messing up.
No. Actually, it's true, because there were experiments with establishment at the state level, but most state constitutions eliminated those, and largely because of religious diversity. You know, and this was a real serious point of contention in the at the founding of this country. If you want to, okay, so say we were going to have like a, you know, this is going to be a Christian nation. Well, who's Christianity? The Baptists, the Anglicans? I mean, not the Catholics. You know. Quakers. I mean, there was a lot of, you know, the Baptists. There was a lot of different denominations, and because they couldn't agree over whose religion should be given priority, they agreed to disagree and all have equal status. And that's the basis of American secularism. It wasn't about, you know, removing religion from the public square, but it was creating an equal distance, if you will, between.
But weren't they all Protestants running from the Catholic Church?
Oh, they were still Catholics. Oh, they're
yeah, but they were kicking butt on the Catholics.
Yeah. Well, but even the you know the early Puritans, I mean, they were all dissenting Protestants, and they were dissenting against the Anglican Church, and they were being burned by Anglicans, so they were fleeing here to, you know, save their skins.
You know, my contribution to this particular point is I think we're going down a rabbit hole. And the reason I suggest that is if you listen, he was using certain, as they say, dog whistle statements that really frame what he was saying. He's saying, look, this society, all these others are against us, good white American Christians. And this is what America is. This is and it doesn't matter. I mean, you want to have that. You still have your academic hat on. you want there to be rationality to what is done. This is all about, in my mind, is an exercise of power. How are we going to motivate fairly uninformed people by utilizing the of things that we know emotionally trigger their reaction? I don't want to. I'm comfortable. I've enjoyed a favorite place in this society. You're telling me that I'm going to, within a few decades, I'm going to be a minority. I just won't have access to the things I had before. We got to make America great again. We got to bring it back to the image that it has been for decades before this. Therein, to me, was the message that we just heard, because it's right. It's riddled with many holes and inconsistencies in what is being said, as you basically open up the conversation on that particular point. But as I would suggest to your audience, it's all about maintaining control, maintaining power,
Maintain privilege.
Privilege.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, race is at the heart of that. There's no two ways about that. There is.
Well, I mean, it seems if we're going to be the people standing for facts and truth, some liberals took some things too far, right? And I'm trying to review a book right now that talks about a case that came out of California, where I don't know if you all are old enough, but there was initiated in school policy this cultural assimilation, where you're going to learn about the religions and the cultures of the world by kind of having kids, elementary school kids, kind of participate, wear the clothes, eat some of the food, memorize pieces of their central text, right? And one parent jumped up and down and said, "Oh, no, 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 no. This is indoctrination." Now, the impetus came from the liberal side, right? A liberal is on the part of some liberals, not all certainly, who took things a little too far, but it became morphed into the Moore Law Center. It uses the case till today to talk about how liberalism is giving away white Christian America by giving everything, exposing the children to these other cultures and religions. And but on the other side too, what if the white Protestant population becomes a minority? What do we become?
Well, so just two comments on that real quick. One is, at the end of the day, this is the the struggle of America, struggle of India, other places as well. Is how do you have a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multiracial society without discrimination? And how do you actually create a genuinely inclusive, at least political, order, essentially social and economic as well. And that originally it was kind of the vision of this notion of a melting pot. I think we've all lived through enough of American history that we know that it's a better idea than in reality, and in part because of the people that are pushing back against it, that don't want the affirmative action programs that will create a more even playing field, that that kind of push for their continued privilege and what have you. One last comment on this. That same speaker at a later part in the conference talked about the need to get rid of democracy and create a theocracy, and he actually held up a cross. And said, this is what we need, because we need a God-oriented society.
Wow.
Abdullah, your comments.
Just carrying that thought one step further, because under theocracy, then if I'm the religious scholar, I'll tell you what God's laws is and what you are to implement. There will be no public discourse on those points.
Yeah, but I mean, who's God? The several ones of Hinduism. I mean, who?
You said white Christian nation.
I think you got your answer.
Play this little clip.
Yeah, this is the clip.
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here. We'll replace it with this right here.
Amen.
That's right, because all glory is not to government, all glory to God.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's holding up a small cross there.
Well, you know, the other thing is that the families, what is that? The presidential opening dinner or whatever it is, they're moving it into the White House. It's never been in the White House.
Wait, so which dinner is this?
You know, the dinner all of our presidents have gone to, that the group called the family has, they're now moving it into the White House.
Yeah, I thought this was the prayer breakfast. They were the ones who organized.
That's what it is. It's
prayer breakfast.
Yeah,
it's kind of a place to see and be seen, and anyway.
Yeah, but it's a seat of influence.
Yeah, no, definitely true. You know,
and presidents, you know, I'm looking at the list of Reagan and Clinton and Obama, and everybody goes to this breakfast.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, Robert Bellow wrote a great article called American Civil Religion back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very famous sociologist. And, you know, one of the things that he talked about is, you know, this notion of a civil religion is, you know, even though we have this formal separation of church and state, we nonetheless have a you know, kind of an informal national identity, which is rooted in Judeo-Christian, you know, tradition.
But the word Judeo-Christian is a 20th century word.
I know. But the point is that the Bell was kind of arguing for is that it's this very amorphous notion of God, it's a very amorphous notion of religion. It's just it's an idea that that, you know, there is a underlying moral order to the universe, and the, you know, American society kind of fits in a particular American exceptionalism narrative. And for the most part, you know, all American presidents have bought into this forever. What's interesting is somewhere along the line, you went from this kind of ecumenical, inclusive civil religion, which was tolerant of, you know, diverse religious faiths. And even like the great line of Dwight Eisenhower, you know, America makes no sense without a firm belief in God, and I don't care what that, you know, or a firm belief in religion, and I don't care what that belief is.
Mm-hmm.
You fast forward, by the time it gets to, and it's slowly evolving, you know, through Reagan, Nixon, Reagan, Bush. By the time we get to George W. Bush, it's much more clearly Christian evangelical. And where we see now with the Christian nationalist movement, it's not even really evangelical. It's become kind of an idol in its own right. It's become kind of a phenomenon in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's interesting how close some of their positions align with our Catholic Supreme Court.
Yes.
Especially on things like abortion and what's a viable feed. I guess it's viable from day one, and I'm wondering what they're going to do with all those frozen embryos, and who's going to go to jail if they get rid of what they're going to do with them.
Good question.
I mean, one thing I've you know, not a student of the Supreme Court, but it seems as though the Supreme Court was tasked to do one thing, and that's to talk about the constitutionality of an issue or not, if it rose to an issue of constitutionality. I could be wrong, but now it's judging everything.
We have a lawyer here. Let's hear your comments on it.
Well, you're I mean, we're delving into what we have certain, like Ursula says, a let's say a literalist, whatever that means. I'm going to interpret the Constitution should be interpreted by the literal meaning of the text. All right. Without looking at its underpinnings, policies that may have led to the formation of the Bill of Rights or particular provisions. But you got to, I think another thing is that in defense of the Supreme Court, the issues that come before it are the brainchilds of let's say lawyers and activists and throughout, and they're bringing the issue. I mean, like what we have in the state of Alabama now with the declaration of a frozen fetus as a viable. When I misspeak the terms, but nonetheless, I mean, these pose, where you're, and I think this is the danger. Like we say, when you have a theocracy that doesn't, without, let's say, a rational backing, I can rely on emotions to carry the day. Then you get to sometimes absurd positions. So I mean, there is the danger when you have some pundit can get up and claim to really be able to interpret and relate the word of God, and if that person is believable, regardless if they're reliable, we have more consternation, more issues, more friction, and further division in our society.
Yeah, no doubt.
So we have poor Nikki Haley. Not that I like her, but we have a Trump machine that is relying on increasing. No, I don't know if he's increasing so much as emphasizing things that are part of disinformation. Because the parameters hasn't changed. The only thing he hasn't said is I told you right that you could drink Clorox bleach and get rid of
COVID.
But if he does win, because the Democrats aren't doing anything. I asked the question today, where can I go so I can put on our list and our next time we talk what Biden's government has done?
I'm sure you can find it on the White House website, but there's got to be a better source than that. But
who's going to search the White House
I know.
website?
But I mean, the irony is, the Biden administration has been enormously successful in terms of passing legislation to deal with climate change, deal with infrastructure, to kind of put people back to work. I mean, but for a variety of reasons, that's not translating into popular support. But I think that one of the issues, I just want to get back to your original point. I'm still kind of baffled by the support that Donald Trump seems to have within mid-America, because if you look at his major initiative, it was getting tax cuts through Congress that really benefited the upper echelons of Wall Street and did not really translate into the lower classes. But he's been able to play this culture war card exceedingly well, and the more bombastic he is, it seems to me the more people kind of gravitate towards him, and this is really where disinformation is really problematic. I mean, they're hyping the big lie. He's continuing to reference the fact that the elections were stolen. They weren't. But there is a core base that supports him. But anyway, but the punchline is this is where I'm not sure how this election is going to come out because we're still so far away. But his whole strategy is not to build a coalition, but just to so rev up his base that they turn out in droves, and so discourage the Democrats that even though they may be numerically superior, they won't turn out. And there's enough of Biden's policies, such as his policy towards Israel, that may encourage people to stay home, and that's really where we might end up with with the Trump victory.
Well, how did that man? Oh, I don't know his name, or that wrote that report that said literally that Biden is suffering from memory loss. How did he get to publish that?
Well, I think that's the challenge that why you raise this as a topic. It is political communication that's has not been vetted, tested, verified, and yet it gets attention. And I think once again, I think another danger
in the first place.
Well, but hear me out on this. The danger lies with us as voters. If we don't, I mean, there's a reluctance to do the work. If you can just simplify my decision by telling me this, that Biden is the bad guy, you made my job easier. And if you cloak it in theocracy and identify with me and my group, I'm gonna believe it. So those are, I think that is the real challenge. How do we decloak? Because for someone to have, I believe it's 4 criminal indictments against them now with a multi-million-dollar judgments against them, but yet he says, "I need you to raise money to pay this because I'm a victim." Black people, you recognize me. I'm a victim. So,
yes,
it is a simplification of a decision-making process that unfortunately too many are buying into.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that one of the challenges is when you look at American politics, it does become like a football match, or a football game. It's like you're for one team and you hate the other team. And people don't really do their due diligence to think about, well, what are the policies that are actually being advocated? Mm-hmm. And instead, you just kind of go along with a 30-second soundbite. And,
right.
I mean, something this actually does fit well into tonight's discussion is back in the day, if you wanted to, win this, get elected to the House of Representatives or the Senate, or the presidency, you needed retail politics. You had to go out and organize constituencies, organize groups. It's all mass media these days. And it's not even mass media. It's like social media.
But what happened to the team, and then I'm going to get to my last question, is about how do we weigh these parties on a scale? How did the team that, I want to say steamroll Obama into the spotlight, where did they go?
They're still around. They're actually, kind of coaching Biden. I think the Biden team wasn't all that crazy about having their advice, but now that it's, because they ran a good campaign on their own to get elected in 2016 or 2020. But it's, but now at this stage, it's like all hands on deck, right?
Well, I mean, there's no question Biden has alienated voters in the Muslim community as a result of the policies and positions it's taken in the war on Gaza. So it is a challenge, and in my mind, it does raise the probability scale for a potentially 4-time convicted individual to be the president. So
but it also takes away the whole notion of freedom of speech. Off of the very place where Scott sits, where you're supposed to learn stuff. You're supposed to learn how to speak out, or law schools where there's moot court and all of this stuff. If you speak out now, you could never have a job in your life in this country.
Well, once again, I think without delving into specific political situations, the reality is we recognize the power, as Scott just alluded to, how social media is a driving force in political communications. And unfortunately, as we witness with Facebook and the big ones, what real control do you have over this, in quotation, private entity? Even when some egregious acts are committed, they just go before Congress. They confess their sins, get slapped on the wrist, and then life goes on.
But see, that's why we gotta, and we'll do this as our time goes on. Look at these senators and look at these representatives and school council people. I mean, because if Trump gets reelected, what is he going to do? I don't know how you bring down the cell things on the borders to prevent people from coming. Then you're going to have massive deportation. You're going to have some more bans, and then you got to find people inside the country that you think shouldn't be here.
Yeah, go ahead, Abdullah.
No, please.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, the early reporting of what a Trump administration would look like, particularly for immigrants, is dire.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, he's been making inroads into the Latin American community or the Latino community. And yet, they're talking about creating, basically camps, concentration camps for, kind of to hold people before they get deported, back to Mexico or to wherever. And, Stephen Miller has been, and Trump is saying this on the stump. I mean, he's out there talking about this. Again, it kind of highlights in my own mind that what he's really trying to do is really rev up the base with the hope that, people will stay home on the Democratic side, because that's what happened with, Hillary Clinton in 2016. People were not that enthused about her candidacy. There was tepid support. People didn't turn out. But on the other side, they were so energized that that even though the Trump supporters, were fewer in number, they really turned out, and they turned out in key states and won it. And again, I'm looking at places like Michigan, where, if I was an Arab American living in Detroit or Dearborn, I'm not sure who I'd vote for, right? I mean, I would not see a strong incentive to go out and vote. I think that's the problem.
I've heard. People are trying to figure out, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I think the only thing we can do on this program is help inform them of the options and how to analyze what the issues are, perhaps, and how to vet who's coming before your community, claiming all kinds of stuff. That they can do for you in the future. I was thinking that our next program, we will look at how to translate more closely political communication into civic wonderment.
That's a hook.
Yeah.
Say it like that. No, I mean, we've got to get people energized. I want to learn this stuff, and for the audience, I've already asked Professor Hibbard to get some students on here, and I've asked Attorney Mitchell to get some everyday people on here. It'll be during Ramadan, and people will be hungry, which may mean that they talk more because they're salivating. But we've got to get some pumped upness. Ramadan is a time of many things, not just fasting from food. It's also a time where we need to take a kind of check on ourselves. So, excuse me for coughing. I thought I got rid of the cold, and it is back. This is Professor Aminah Al Deen. I've had a wonderful and informative talk with Professor Scott Hibbard and Attorney Abdullah Mitchell on paying political attention. We will be back with some of the same subjects, but with some more, probably around March 18th. But we will let you know. thank all of you for being with us. This is Critical Talk, which is a production of Sound Vision.